Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let us be very clear that in terms of the deficit reduction package that is being debated, we are talking about an issue of huge consequence, not only for people today, but for our kids and our grandchildren. This is likely, from a domestic perspective, the most important issue that any member of the Senate or the House will ever vote on in his or her political career. This is a huge deal which in many ways will shape the future of America. Now, I know the media refers to the discussion as whether or not we're going to have a big deal, $4 trillion, or whether we're going to have a smaller deal of $2 trillion, but the real issue is whether or not we're going to have a fair deal, a deficit reduction package which represents the interest of working people and the vast majority of our people, or whether we're going to have a deficit reduction package which ends up reflecting the needs of the wealthiest people in this country who are doing phenomenally well, and the largest corporations in this country who in many instances are making record-breaking profits. That's really what the debate is about. Now, the Republican position on deficit reduction has been extremely clear and is consistent with their right-wing ideology. Despite the fact that our current deficit crisis has been caused by 2 wars unpaid for, huge tax breaks that have gone to the wealthiest people in this country, and a recession caused by the deregulation of Wall Street and the lack of revenue coming in as a result of that recession, our Republican friends are adamant that while the richest people in this country are becoming much richer, while today we have the most unequal distribution of income and wealth of any major country, where the top 400 individuals own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans, that gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider, our Republican friends say the deficit must be balanced on the backs of working families, the elderly, the sick, and the children. No, the very rich, the top 1%, who now earn more income than the bottom 50%, should not be asked to contribute 1 penny more. And the Republicans are very clear that despite the fact that corporate profits are soaring, that corporation after corporation are enjoying huge tax loopholes that enable them to make billions of dollars a year in profits and not pay 1 penny in taxes, Republicans say, sorry, off the table. Large, profitable corporations, CEOs making millions a year, they don't have to contribute to deficit reduction. Only the children have to contribute to deficit reduction. Only the elderly have to contribute to deficit reduction. Only working families, only the unemployed, only the sick. We have to balance the budget on the backs of those people, but if you are very rich and getting richer, if you're a profitable corporation, off the table. You don't have to contribute a nickel. Poll after poll shows that the Republican position and their ideology is way out of touch with what the American people need or want. This is not Bernie Sanders talking. This is the American people talking. Poll after poll, when the American people are asked, what is your preferred option in terms of deficit reduction, they say, ask the wealthy to pay more in taxes. So when our Republican friends come up here and they say the American people don't want to raise taxes on the wealthy, just not true. So to my mind, what the Republicans are proposing is not only immoral in terms of coming down heavy on the most vulnerable people in our society, people who are already hurting as a result of the recession, real unemployment, 15%. What do you want to take out of those people? They don't have any job. Highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. 21% of our kids living in poverty. You want to cut them even more. Hunger among senior citizens in this country going up. You want to take away their nutrition programs? Not only is that immoral, to my mind, it is bad economics because you don't get the economy moving until working people have some money to go out and buy the goods and services that companies are selling. So, Mr. President, to my mind, where the Republicans are coming from on this issue is way, way out of right field and way out of touch with where the American people believe we should go. But having said that, Mr. President, I have to tell you that I am very confused as to where President Obama is coming from on this issue. And maybe I speak here as an independent, not a Republican, not a Democrat, longest-serving independent in American congressional history. But I think I speak for the vast majority of the American people on this issue. Where is President Obama on this issue? We know where the Republicans are coming from. Suddenly, out of nowhere, President Obama tells us that Social Security cuts have got to be placed on the table. Where does this come from? The President understands that Social Security hasn't contributed one nickel to our deficit. In fact, Social Security has a $2.6 trillion surplus today, can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 25 years. Social Security is funded by the payroll tax, not by the U.S. Treasury, and the President understands that. And yet the President has now put on the table significant cuts in Social Security, as well as Medicare, as well as Medicaid, despite his knowledge and his previous statements that cuts in these programs would be devastating to ordinary Americans. Mr. President, the President of the United States, Barack Obama, in recent statements has talked about the growth of political cynicism in this country and has argued that the American people are sick and tired of politicians who refuse to tackle big issues. There is truth to what he is saying, but there is also a bigger truth, and that is that the American people are sick and tired and dismayed about candidates who run for office and say one thing, and then after they are elected, they do something very different. In that regard, let me mention that when candidate Barack Obama ran for office, he told the American people over and over again that he was going to fight to protect the needs of ordinary Americans and the elderly and the sick and the children. Among many other promises that he made during his tough campaign against Senator McCain, he said that he was not going to cut Social Security benefits. That is what he said over and over again. And let me quote then Senator Barack Obama and what he told the AARP on September 6, 2008. And I quote, "John McCain's campaign has suggested that the best answer for the growing pressures on Social Security might be to cut cost of living adjustments or raise the retirement age. Let me be clear, I will not do either." End of quote, Barack Obama, September 2008. So, Mr. President, when you want to Ask why the American people are frustrated with politicians, are increasingly cynical. It has a lot to do with candidates who say one thing and do another thing. If you're told the American people you're not going to cut Social Security, then don't cut Social Security. Keep your word. And in case people think that, well, you know, these proposed cuts are not significant, they're just really trifling, let me quote from a document from Social Security Works, a coalition of many, many organizations who are doing a great job defending Social Security. And this is a quote from their recent document. And when President Obama and others are talking about cutting Social Security, one of the approaches that they are looking at is changing how we do COLAs, how we do CPIs. The Congressional Budget Office estimates, and this is from that document by Social Security Works, the CBO estimates adoption of the so-called chain CPI, which is what I believe the President is talking about, which would be used to determine Social Security's annual COLA, would cut benefits by $112 billion over 10 years. The Social Security Administration chief actuary estimates the effects of this change would be that beneficiaries who retire at age 65 and receive average benefits would get $560 less a year at age 75. Let me repeat that. $560 less a year at age 75. Now, that may not seem like a lot of money to some folks around here, but when you're trying to get by at the age of 75, when you got all kinds of medical bills and you got all kinds of prescription drug costs and you're trying to eat and maybe you're getting $14,000 a year in Social Security, you know what? $560 a year is a lot of money. But then it gets worse, because what the Social Security Administration estimates that at 85, and more people, thank God, are living to 85, people who are very fragile at age 85, what they would see are cuts of about $1,000 a year. The longer you live, the more your cuts. Is that what we are about in America now? We don't ask billionaires to pay any more in taxes, but we tell somebody who's 85 years of age, living on $14,000 a year, that they would get $1,000 less than otherwise because we've adopted the so-called chain CPI that I gather the President is pushing. Mr. President, I think the issue is very clear, and that is that the Senate, this Congress, have got to stand with the overwhelming majority of the American people who understand that the solution to this deficit crisis requires shared sacrifice. Yes, we've got to take a look at waste and fraud and bureaucracy in every agency of government. No one disputes that. Yes, we have got to take a hard look at military spending, which has tripled since 1997. And yes, maybe we've got to bring the troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan sooner than many here would like or that the President would like, and save substantial sums as we do that. But most certainly, if we're going to go forward with shared sacrifice, yes, we do have to ask billionaires, despite all their power and all of their campaign contributions and all of their lobbying, maybe the billionaires who are doing phenomenally well may have to contribute to deficit reduction. And yes, maybe those companies that stash their money in tax havens in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands in order to avoid taxes to this country, $100 billion a year, maybe they are going to have to start paying their fair share. You know, Mr. President, on my website, which is sanders.senate.gov, I put a small letter that said to the President, Mr. President, stand tall. Take on these right-wing ideologues who want to make devastating cuts to working families. And just in a couple of weeks, we have 135,000 signatures on that letter. And I think that letter reflects what the American people want. They want shared sacrifice. They do not want to see the elderly, the kids, or working families being battered more and more, especially in the midst of this recession. So, Mr. President, I would say to President Obama, do not assume that just because you work and reach an agreement that everybody here is going to support that agreement. The people demand fairness, they demand shared sacrifice, and some of us intend to bring that about. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I asked to speak to up to 7 minutes. I don't believe I'll need it, but
Without objection.
thank you, Mr. President. I always enjoy listening to my New England colleagues speak. You know, the right-wing rhetoric stuff, though, it really doesn't work for me when there are people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle who are trying to solve these very real problems. And as you know, Mr. President, we're working on a sense of the Senate here today, and I'm rising to speak about my own sense of the Senate. And it's an amendment that I filed to this bill that we're on. It expresses a key common sense idea. It's very simple. Don't raise taxes on small businesses, period. But especially don't do it at a time when unemployment is over 9% and there's meager job growth throughout the country and quite frankly, is stalled out. We can't afford more of the failed economic policies that we've been experiencing. And frankly, I can't believe that increasing the tax burdens on small businesses, even when, you know, it's on the radar screen here in Washington, it just makes no sense to me. I want to do the opposite. I think we should respond to these terrible unemployment numbers with a pro-growth idea like a payroll tax reduction for businesses to hire workers. Let's do something constructive to add an incentive to actually get our economic engine moving again, especially with the businesses that can do it best, which are small businesses. The idea that we would raise taxes right now on small businesses is the very definition of being out of touch with people back home who actually work for a living in this country and create jobs for others. As I travel back to Massachusetts, and I virtually do every weekend, I meet with, gosh, I think I've had over 230 or 40 meetings since I've been elected, and the biggest question I'm always faced with is, you know, what's going on in Washington? Why do you guys always put that wet blanket over us through overregulation, over taxation, that lack of business certainty and stability? And it's not something that really is making a lot of sense back home. And when I hear from those small business people back in Massachusetts, they're worried that they can't hire more workers. And we need to actually create confidence in our small businesses to put people back to work. And instead, we're terrifying them with these tax proposals and a lot of the rhetoric you're hearing here today. They don't know what's coming down next. They don't know what's next. People up here listening, they have no clue what's next. What are we going to do in Washington next to put that wet blanket over businesses? And we expect them to make a new commitment to hire an employee? It's not going to happen. In particular, recent calls from some on the other side of the aisle to repeal the LIFO, the last-in, first-out accounting method, and applying it retroactively without even reducing the corporate tax rate or doing anything whatsoever to soften the blow on small businesses would be disastrous on those who depend on the current system. And as you know, our corporate tax rate is already the second highest in the country. And if Japan lowers theirs, it'll be the highest. And it's often the small local companies that get punished the most. Yet some people here in Washington want to tax small businesses more. I don't get it. I'm sorry. And despite these many challenges in the past decade, this country has seen the creation of more than 300,000 small business companies with 500 employees or less. And these small firms and the founders who started them took risk during a time that many large companies have been downsizing. And as a member of the Small Business Committee, I hear testimony regularly from many of our business leaders expressing the difficulties of the current environment. And I believe we absolutely need to do everything in our power to protect small businesses from the heavy hand of government, the over-regulation, the lack of certainty and stability, the potential overtaxation. And we have in Massachusetts and throughout this great country, small businesses and especially manufacturers are the keys to our economic recovery and the economic engine here in Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts and the rest of the country, they're the lifeblood of our economy, ranging from mom-and-pop stores to some of the country's most cutting-edge, high-tech startup companies. So how can we tax these job-creating small businesses and then stand on the Senate floor and speak about how awful it is that unemployment is at an all-time high, while cloaking it in the language of rhetoric of millionaires and billionaires in corporate jets? We all know that even if we do the things that are talked about, it doesn't get us close to solving or dealing with the problems. It's outrageous, and quite frankly, the American people can see right through it. We should be doing better. So I filed the amendment today to say that I, for one, will not support more burdens on small businesses. They already face enough problems and challenges. The current unemployment numbers that we're all seeing from states across the country should serve as a wake-up call that people are still hurting. They need some relief. They want to do their best, but they're being stifled. That wet blanket is just hurting them and stopping them from creating jobs. It should be our #1 priority, Mr. President, and I hope that it will get the attention and support of every one of my colleagues. If you care about the survival of your state's small businesses, stop proposing increasing the taxes, increasing regulatory burdens, creating that wet blanket and killing off the incentive to actually go out and hire. So, Mr. President, I thank you for your courtesy in the beginning, and I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
The Senate has been debating a non-binding measure urging high-income earners to contribute more to deficit reduction. A vote